Picture this. You are 5 years old, and it is 23,000 years ago. You have just found the best puddle of your entire short life. It formed inside a footprint left by a giant ground sloth, an animal roughly the size of a bear that lumbered past this lakeshore an hour ago. You do not care about the sloth. You care about the puddle. So you jump in it. Then you jump to the next one. And the next one. This is not a story someone made up. It is written into the mud itself at a place now called White Sands in New Mexico. Researchers there have documented human footprints dating back over 20,000 years, tracking children as they splashed, skidded, and raced across the wet ground. One researcher put it simply, all kids like to play with muddy puddles. That is quite literally what it is. Read that again. 23,000 years before smartphones, before television, before organized sport. A child was doing the exact same thing your child did yesterday. We tend to imagine ancient humans as grim survival machines. Hunting, fleeing predators, freezing through endless winters. No time for joy. That picture is wrong. And the evidence for just how wrong it is has been piling up quite dramatically in the last few years. Let's start with something you would never expect to survive tens of thousands of years. Music. In a cave in southern Germany called Hohlfels, archaeologists made a discovery in 2008. 12 fragments of bone, pulled straight out of the dirt. When pieced together, they formed a flute, carved from the wing bone of a griffon vulture, with 5-finger holes and a notched mouthpiece. It is roughly 40,000 years old, made by some of the very first modern humans to settle in Europe. The lead researcher, archaeologist Nicholas Conard, called it unambiguously the oldest instrument in the world. His findings were published in the journal Nature. And it was not alone. In the same layer of sediment, his team found ivory carved into the shape of a woman. Art and music, buried side by side. Now, here is where the story gets genuinely strange. There is an even older candidate for oldest instrument, found earlier, in a cave in Slovenia. It is called the Divje Babe flute, carved from the thigh bone of a cave bear, with neat, evenly spaced holes. Some researchers date it to around 60,000 years ago, long before modern humans reached that part of Europe. Which would mean it wasn't us who made it. It would mean Neanderthals made it. For years, this find was treated as proof that our extinct cousins had music too. That they sat around fires and played melodies just like we did. But other scientists pushed back hard. A separate study argued the holes were not carved at all, but puncture marks left by hyenas gnawing on the bone. The debate is still not settled. And honestly, that is the most honest thing we can tell you about ancient history. The evidence is real. The interpretation is often a fight. Either way, one fact holds steady. Somewhere between 40 and 60,000 years ago, someone sat in the dark, carved holes into a bone, and figured out how to make it sing. Now let's talk about something that might be even more surprising. Gambling. Yes, gambling. As in dice. For a long time, historians assumed dice were an old world invention. Something dreamed up in Mesopotamia, roughly 5,500 years ago. A 2026 study changed everything, published in the journal American Antiquity by researcher Robert Madden. Madden examined more than 600 bone artifacts from 57 archaeological sites across the western United States. Objects that had been sitting in collections, unrecognized, for decades. They were two-sided, flat, marked on one face and blank on the other. Designed deliberately to be thrown and to land randomly. Some of them dated back roughly 12,800 years. Crafted by Folsom-era hunter-gatherers in what is now Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. That is over 6,000 years earlier than the previous record holders from Mesopotamia. Ice Age hunter-gatherers playing games of chance, before writing, before farming, before cities existed anywhere on Earth. And this is where the twist comes in. These were not idle toys. Madden argues they were something closer to social infrastructure. Historical records show dice games were often played by strangers, from different bands, meeting at territorial frontiers or large gatherings. A game of chance gave two suspicious, unrelated groups something to do together. Something with rules, with fairness, and with no real stakes beyond pride and a few possessions. Madden described it this way. Games of chance created neutral, rule-governed spaces. They allowed people to exchange goods and information, form alliances, and manage uncertainty. In other words, dice were not a break from survival. Dice were a survival tool. A way to turn potential enemies into trading partners, one roll at a time. And there is another detail worth sitting with. Historical accounts of these games show something like 81% were played by women. Fun, it turns out, had a gender history too. So we've got music, tens of thousands of years old, and dice, over 12,000 years old. But what about the oldest form of entertainment of all? Talking. Specifically, storytelling. In the 1970s, and again decades later, anthropologist Polly Wiesner recorded conversations. Among the Hoansi people of the Kalahari Desert. They are hunter-gatherers, and for the vast majority of our species' existence, that is how every single human lived. Wiesner tracked what people talked about during the day and what they talked about at night, around the fire. Daytime conversation was practical. Complaints, land disputes, economic negotiation, the business of staying alive. But at night, everything changed. Around 81% of firelit conversation shifted into a completely different register. Stories, myths, accounts of distant relatives, tales of the ancestors. Wiesner published her findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and she put it beautifully. There is something about fire in the middle of the darkness that bonds, mellows, and excites people. She called firelight talk the original social media. Long before we had feeds, we had flames and a circle of people leaning in to hear what happened next. This may be why fire itself was such an evolutionary turning point. Not just for cooking, not just for warmth, but because it extended the day into hours built entirely for imagination. Think about what that means. Somewhere around a fire, hundreds of thousands of years ago, a skilled storyteller became something like a celebrity. The person everyone leaned toward. Charisma, it turns out, is not a modern invention either. So here is the bigger idea forming underneath all of this. Fun was never a luxury bolted onto survival once the hard work was done. Fun was the infrastructure. It built trust between strangers. It bonded families after dark. It gave children the coordination and social skills they would need as adults. Play was not the opposite of survival. Play was survival, wearing a disguise. Now, we do have to be careful here. It is tempting to look at a bone with holes in it and declare, with total confidence, that we understand exactly what it meant. We do not. We cannot interview a fulsome hunter-gatherer about why they carved that die. Archaeologists constantly debate whether an object was play, ritual, status, or something we do not even have a word for yet. The Divje Babe flute controversy is proof of that. What looks unmistakably like music to one scientist looks unmistakably like hyena teeth marks to another. Even Madden, in his own dice study, admits there is a small chance some of these objects were used for divination rather than play. The line between a game and a ritual was probably a lot blurrier than we would like. So we hold these facts with open hands, not as final answers, but as the best current read on evidence still being pulled out of the ground. What we can say, confidently, is this. The instinct to play did not arrive with arcades or televisions or phones. It was there when a Neanderthal or an early human first pierced a bone and made it whistle. It was there when hunter-gatherers, 12,000 years before Mesopotamia, carved a die and threw it toward a stranger. It was there every single night a Jew, Hoansi elder leaned into the firelight and said, "Let me tell you what happened." And it was there in the mud at White Sands, 23,000 years ago, when a child looked at a sloth's footprint and saw, not a hazard, but a puddle worth jumping in. We like to think of fun as something we invented once life got easy. Air conditioning, weekends, streaming platforms. But the truth is almost the opposite. Fun is one of the oldest technologies our species ever built. Older than the wheel, older than farming, possibly older than us. Every board game night, every song stuck in your head, every story you told your friends last weekend, is an echo of something that started around a fire tens of thousands of years ago. So the next time someone tells you to stop wasting time having fun, you now have an answer. You are not wasting time. You are doing the single oldest, most human thing there is.